This is Miriam Raftery with the East County Magazine radio show on KNSJ 89.1 FM Descanso, the Network for Social Justice. And today, my very special guest is Marni Von Wilpert. She is a Democrat and one of the leading contenders running in the 48th Congressional District for an open seat as a result of Republican Darrell Issa retiring. She is a San Diego City Council member, a former civil prosecutor with the District Attorney's Office, and a former lawyer for the House Committee on Education and Labor. Marni, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We're delighted to have you. So, first, can you help us clarify after California's redistricting measure? It's really confusing since the maps don't show every town, but it appears to include Escondido, Vista, Ramona, Julian, Warner Springs, Santa Isabel, Borrego, Descanso, and Pine Valley, as well as part of Riverside County, such as Palm Springs. Is that right? Did I leave anything out there?
No, actually, Ramona got cut out. Ramona and Julian are just cut outside the district
Oh, okay.
now.
Okay.
After Prop 50 was enacted, it shifted the district kind of north and west a little bit.
Oh,
So,
very good.
yep, it goes down, Borrego Springs, the Anza Borrego Desert, and then up and around to Escondido and San Marcos and Fallbrook and Vista and a little bit of Oceanside, in
Oh,
fact.
wow.
And
So this is a
yep,
creatively drawn map
it
there.
is. Yep. Then up through Temecula, Murrieta, into
Yeah.
Palm Springs and Indian Wells. So it's a very large district.
Yeah. Now, where do you live? Which community?
I live currently in Scripps Ranch. I'm
Mhm.
right down the road from, Escondido and San Marcos. And this is actually where I grew up. I grew up here. I still call it the North County Fair Mall in Escondido. It's where I bought my high school prom dress. I still call it the Wild Animal Park. That's where I grew
Right.
up going. So this is my hometown.
Very good. And as a Scripps Ranch resident, I'm sure you're very aware of the seriousness of fire dangers, wildfires. There's always one of
Oh,
the East County
yes.
issues. So we'll get to that in a
Yes.
bit. So let's start out by having you tell us, why do you think you are the strongest candidate to win the general election and square off against a Republican, most likely Supervisor Jim Desmond?
Yes, so I am running to stand up to Donald Trump. We need to take our country back. We need to unrig our economy so that it works for everyone and working people, not just the wealthy few. We need healthcare that makes people healthier and not poorer. And we
Yeah.
need to stop Donald Trump's chaos and corruption, including having a functioning immigration system and stopping the un-American aggressive tactics of ICE. And I am the strongest Democrat to flip this district because I've done it before. I've won competitive red to blue elections multiple times, and I've governed and delivered for the citizens in our region for 6 years now. Miriam,
Very good.
I've spent my whole life in public service. I served in the United States Peace Corps in
Hmm.
sub-Saharan Africa during the AIDS crisis. I worked as a civil rights lawyer in Mississippi, so I know why voting rights are so important.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, served as a local prosecutor here in San Diego. I prosecuted corporations that broke the law.
Interesting. So I want to go back to immigration for a minute. As the daughter of an immigrant, you've said our immigration system should reflect our values, not fear and division. And yet Trump's mass deportations are going way beyond deporting violent criminals, which is what he originally campaigned to do. Now, is anybody who crossed the border without authorization, even as babies, are getting deported. We're seeing protection status taken away for people even who came here legally, like Afghan translators who helped our
Hmm.
military and people who were granted asylum. Um, and he's even talking about denaturalizing some citizens. So, what specifically would you work to change if you're elected?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And as you rightly pointed out, my father is an immigrant to this country.
Mhm.
And he then, was drafted during the Vietnam era and served in the United States Army and served our nation. And I'm very proud of my immigrant family background. And I grew up on a border town. And so I know that if we can have a strong, secure border that stops drugs and bad actors and guns, but promotes lawful immigration and families and students and commerce, has a pathway to citizenship for people, including, as you mentioned, the Afghan immigrants who served alongside our soldiers in Afghanistan and the dreamers, the young
Yeah.
people who came here who, through no fault of their own, have done nothing but go to college, want to make a good member of our society. They need a pathway to citizenship as well. And we have to stop the chaos and corruption of Donald Trump's ICE agents. I am the public safety chair for the city of San Diego. I support professional, highly trained law enforcement, but ICE is not law enforcement. It's chaos. When
Yeah.
Renee Good and Alex Pretty were killed in the streets, think that's when the whole nation saw this is not law enforcement and it needs
Yeah.
to stop.
Two American citizens who were shot, gunned down and killed. I mean, basically,
Yeah.
in the case
Yep.
of Alex Preddy, shot 9 times, some of those in the back when he was already pinned down on the ground, for those that may not be familiar with that. Um, Many Americans have voiced deep concern about the trampling of constitutional rights by the current administration, which is even defying court orders on issues such as immigration and tearing down part of the White House without authorization. What should Congress do to restore checks and balances, particularly if Democrats are successful in taking back Congress? And we should note that this seat is one of a handful that Democrats are targeting nationwide that they believe is important and gives them the potential to take back control of Congress again, at least in the House of Representatives. Um, so what should be done to restore those checks and balances?
Yeah, no, Miriam, thank you for the question. I studied our Constitution quite heavily in law school, and the founding fathers put in the three branches of government to be co-equal branches of government for a reason. And it was to prevent someone like Donald Trump claiming authoritarianism in our country. And so Congress needs to become a co-equal branch of government again and stop rubber stamping everything coming out of Donald Trump's White House. We need to enact the War Powers Resolution and rein in Donald Trump's unilateral war in Iran, which has caused nothing but chaos and caused our prices here in California to spike at the gas pump and energy prices and food prices. I mean,
That brings me to my next question, which was what
yes.
actions would you support to reduce inflation and improve the economy and help the many Americans who are struggling with affordability on everything from groceries to housing costs? And we should note that Trump ran on again on a platform of reducing inflation, and in fact, it's increased in many sectors.
Yeah, I hear the most from, all my constituents that I serve in Southern California is that they're grappling with the incredibly high cost of living here in Southern California.
Yeah.
And I've been working very hard to try and help. I worked with our local teachers when I found out they were being priced out of the housing market and were leaving California. I helped start the very first teacher down payment assistance grant program and worked with the local teachers union so that they could afford to buy homes in the communities where they teach, and it's working. I'm getting pictures from teachers, selfies in front of their new front doors
Wow.
with their families, and they're staying in our classrooms. I also helped write the first law in the nation requiring grocery stores to give people the same coupons, $3 off the price of eggs or milk without having to download a digital app and get a digital coupon
Thank
because
you.
it excludes people. The
Yeah.
AARP called and said, hey, senior citizens by and large are paying more for food because they're being forced to try and figure out this digital coupon. So now
Right.
grocery stores need to have in-store coupons just like everyone else.
Yeah.
But
Good point.
meanwhile, Donald Trump and now, Jim Desmond, who is endorsed by Donald Trump,
Mhm.
want to raise our prices through these continued tariff wars. We have to undo the tariffs that Americans are paying and push back on everything he's doing. If we're going to get affordable health care in this country again, we need to undo the big, ugly bill, restore the funding to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act tax subsidies, and make sure that Planned Parenthoods are funded and everyone has access to health care. So these are how I would start. But the first thing we got to do is stand up to Donald Trump in Congress.
Yeah. You are pro-choice and pro-LGBTQ rights. I was going to ask what your priorities are for restoring and protecting women's reproductive health, as well as the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals.
Yes, so I am proud to have had the support of Planned Parenthood through all of my elections. And, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was devastated. And we passed a law here in San Diego requiring women to have access to clinics, making sure that protesters could not get in their way.
Mhm.
And in Congress, I want to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade across this country and make it a national federal law. Same thing with, LGBTQ rights. I am a young LGBTQ woman. I just got engaged to my girlfriend,
Oh,
Sarah.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yep, we are planning to get married next year. And so it's deeply personal to me to just be
Yes,
treated with dignity and equality like everyone else.
absolutely.
And so I want to get the Equality Act passed in Congress because we need to make sure people face discrimination, who face, you know, um, homophobia, they need to be protected and just have the same rights everyone else has.
Yeah. The Trump administration has slashed not only healthcare, they've actually abolished the Department of Education. Can you please share your views on that?
Yes, so I'm a proud product of our public education system here in Southern California. I went to public schools my whole life. including college. I went to
Mhm.
UC Berkeley, another great state school.
Oh, my son's
And
alma mater.
oh, go Bears!
Yep.
Fantastic. Um, and I'm very proud to have earned the support, of our classroom teachers unions, for example, and our California School Employees Association. The folks who do grounds maintenance and the nurses at school and the counselors, and all of us are deeply disturbed by Donald Trump's cuts to our education system, including closing the Department of Education. So, instead of spending $25 billion of taxpayer money on Donald Trump's foreign war in Iran, we need to spend it here at home. We need to actually fund our local education programs in classrooms so that students get good educations no matter where they come from in this country.
Yeah. Wildfires have been devastating for so many of the communities across the district that you're running in, and yet Trump has slashed federal firefighting funding, which I know is deeply alarming to every firefighter I talk to. He has also
Yes.
called for the elimination of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has provided disaster relief many times to residents right here in San Diego County after devastating wildfires and floods and other disasters. Would you fight to protect FEMA and disaster relief aid and to get that firefighting money restored?
Yes, I will wholeheartedly support our federal firefighters, not only in fully funding them so they can do their jobs, but also making sure they have the equipment they need to keep our community safe. Miriam, as you mentioned, I grew up in Scripps Ranch, and in 2003, the Cedar Fire came through and destroyed hundreds of homes. Most of my high school friends lost their homes. And we were evacuated. Thank goodness the firefighters saved the home I grew up in. But then the Witch Creek fire came through a few years later and destroyed significant homes in Rancho Bernardo, Penasquitos, San Pasqual Valley. And so since I've been on the San Diego City Council, I've been a champion for our wildfire preparedness programs. I have gotten funded not one, not two, but three wildfire attack helicopters for the whole region in San Diego. Because,
Okay,
wildfires
good.
don't respect city boundaries. We help out wherever we can.
Oh no, we've seen those helicopters out here at work many times on our fires in
Yes.
East County.
Yep, and I'm very proud to have earned the endorsements of the San Diego firefighters, Local 145, because they know I am the strongest candidate to fight for our wildfire protection resources. And yes, of course, I will protect FEMA. And what we saw in the Los Angeles fires, earlier last year was absolutely
Yeah.
devastating. And we need to make sure that the federal government is going to fund FEMA because natural disasters are going to continue to happen and get worse with climate change.
Yeah,
So we need to have a disaster response program in the federal government.
right. We've seen FEMA come in and do things like provide trailers for people to live in temporarily while they're
Mhm.
waiting for permits to rebuild their homes and, other money to repair roofs and rebuild. Um, Another East County issue. East County is home to Cleveland National Forest and
Mhm.
several designated federal wilderness areas, as well as some Bureau of Land Management areas. However, the Trump administration is closing many national forest offices and seeking to open our national forests up to logging, mining, and other environmentally destructive uses, also allowing roads and roadless wilderness areas. And I just heard yesterday they have just authorized apparently cyanide bombs for predators to be put on Bureau of Land Management property, even though this has literally killed people before kids, who pick these things up and don't know what they are. So I wanted to ask you if you will work to protect these areas from uses like that. Is there a reasonable middle ground here, or do you think those are, inappropriate uses, or at least some of them?
Yeah, no, I am an environmentalist. I one of the reasons I'm running for Congress is I believe we need to take care of our planet for the next generation. And everyone deserves access to clean air, clean water, and affordable energy prices. We are finding that sustainable energy is more affordable, and we need to protect our public lands to do this. I mean, where would we be if we didn't have the national parks in this nation? So I am wholeheartedly against raiding our public lands for logging, for drilling, any of that. And I will stand up to Donald Trump every day on that. Another issue that came up recently, I was in Borrego Springs. Talking to a wonderful group of voters in Borrego
Mhm.
Springs. And this is a community I grew up going to. I camped out there as a local Girl Scout because of the dark sky community. So we learned about
Oh yeah.
constellations when I was a
Uh-huh,
kid.
uh-huh.
And it's such a hidden gem, in the Anza Borrego beautiful state park with the
Gorgeous.
flower blooms. We need to protect it. And we need to make sure that Donald Trump does not come in and try and destroy all of our public lands that are true gems for all of us.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about gun violence for a moment. How would you balance your stated views on the need to protect Americans against mass shootings? We might note
Mhm.
we've had two of them here in East County at two of our high schools some years back, versus those who want to be able to own guns for legitimate reasons such as self-protection or hunting. The people that, a lot of folks out here in East County, they want to go deer hunting or turkey hunting. Is there a balance there? What are your views?
Yeah, I'm a strong proponent of gun violence prevention, and I am not worried about the lawful, responsible gun owners who are doing the right thing. Who keeps me up at night are the people who want to shoot a school or a place of worship or an office
Yeah,
or a domestic partner. And I've largely found that lawful, responsible gun owners agree. They don't want people shooting schools or churches or mosques or
right.
temples. And so the way I've approached preventing gun violence in our communities is by working with people and bringing people into the conversation and not dividing us so much. So,
Mm.
for example, we unfortunately had a horrible mass shooting in the downtown San Diego gas lamp district in April of 2021. I had just recently been elected as a city council member, and the shooter killed a 28-year-old valet driver, just 28-year-old kid, just valeting cars for a hotel. He was shot 5 times in the chest, died on the scene. 4 tourists were shot. And luckily, Good Samaritans, yeah, tackled the shooter in the middle of the street. And the police chief called me and said, Marni, I have to tell you about the crime. And the shooter had two prior violent felony convictions. And I said, wait a minute.
What was he doing
How,
owning a gun? Yeah,
yeah, and how did he have a gun? Because California has a robust background check system. And if you're a convicted violent felon, you can't own a gun in California.
right.
And he said, Marni, he didn't. He had a ghost gun. And I said, what, chief? And he said, yeah, it's when you go to a lawful firearms dealer and you can't pass a background check to get a fully assembled firearm, you can put your ID in your back pocket, no ID check required, go to the shelf below, buy the unassembled parts of a firearm to take home.
And build it yourself.
Build it yourself, the lower, the slide, the receiver, the trigger bank. And they call them ghost guns because
Mhm.
often those are folks who are trying to purchase, guns around background checks and they're
Right.
using them in crimes.
And
And when the
they're
police
not registered.
they're not registered. That's why the police call them ghost guns. They
Hmm.
disappear in the system like a ghost. So I wrote the first law in California to close this loophole. And
Yeah.
I told lawful firearms dealers, I said, hey, if you want to sell the unassembled parts of a weapon, the slide, the receiver,
Hmm.
sell them all you want, but stamp them with a registration number, just like you would a fully assembled firearm.
Good point.
So to buy the parts of weapons, you have to pass a background check, just like you would a fully assembled gun. And then I've saved the lawful responsible gun owners a step because when they assemble a gun at home, it's now pre-registered.
Hmm.
But anyone, a
Registered.
gang member, a domestic violence abuser who can't buy a gun, they would no longer be able to buy the parts of a gun. And it worked. And the way that I did it was I had, high school students came to my press conferences about it, and I had moms demand action for gun violence, but I also had uniformed law enforcement by my side because the police also don't like being shot by illegal guns on the street.
Yeah, I bet.
And that brought people into the conversation, and universally it was supported, and now it's gone statewide.
Okay, thank you for that. Marnie, as a labor attorney in Washington, D.C., you drafted the PRO Act, which would be similar but stronger than California's AB 5, requiring that more workers be considered employees rather than independent contractors. And while this is very well intentioned to help the workers, the consequences of AB 5 have been challenging for small businesses and nonprofits and media outlets like ours that rely on a lot of freelancers. I can tell you that our nonprofit media outlet would be out of business if not for the exceptions that were carved out in AB 5, but they're not in the PRO Act last time I checked. If elected, would you be open to some amendments to add better protections for small nonprofits, small businesses, and struggling newspapers and other media outlets?
Yes, thank you for the question. I was a union rights lawyer for President Obama and his administration. I
Mhm.
argued workers' rights cases across the country. And I do remember when AB 5 was passed here in California, there were amendments that were needed to be made for local small businesses, artists, for example, musicians as well.
Mhm.
And of course, I'd be completely open to doing those on a national level. It's just the real issue that AB 5 was really trying to target was the large gig economy, the Uber drivers,
Right.
Instacart workers. And so I'm always happy to listen, and that's one of the things I do best as a local elected official is I
Mhm.
listen. We don't get it right every time,
Yeah,
but at the same time, we do need to make sure the workers in the Amazon warehouses and the Walmart warehouses
are protected.
all have a voice on their job and are protected. Yep.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. You have briefly mentioned the Iran war, but can you please share your foreign policy priorities and specifically your views on the Iran war, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and uh, the Ukraine war, the Ukraine invasion, I should say, by Russia?
Yes. No, as I mentioned earlier, I spent 2.5 years serving our nation in the United States Peace Corps. My grandfather served in the U.S. Army, my father served in the U.S. Army, and I chose to serve going abroad in the Peace Corps. And it was an incredible program. I took care of children born with HIV whose parents had died of AIDS in the AIDS epidemic. And it was President Bush II, the younger Bush, who deployed me. And it was some of the best foreign diplomacy we'd ever done. Our national relationships with African countries were so strong because we were doing one of the best public health programs this world has ever seen.
And yet Trump has eliminated U.S. aid. I'm hearing that
Yes.
more than a million
Yep.
babies or people have died specifically as a result of that
Correct. And now
decision.
we're losing our diplomatic ties with these countries. China is replacing us in Africa. I even saw it when I was there. So I will be the second Peace Corps volunteer in Congress. There's only one left. We need more. And those are going to be my views on how we need to lead as United States of America. We should be a democracy people look up to, not an international bully that turns our back on our NATO allies, for example. And I did mention the war in Iran. I'm wholeheartedly against Donald Trump and the way he has declared war in Iran without asking the American people. Of course, the Ayatollah in Iran was absolutely terrible to his own people. He crushed their protests. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. It will be devastating for the entire global security system. However, the way Donald Trump is going about this is a complete quagmire and a mess. And same thing with what's happening in Ukraine. I've been devastated by what's happening in Ukraine. We had Peace
Sure.
Corps Ukraine before Donald Trump got elected.
Mhm.
And you also asked about my views on Israel and Palestine. I'm very deeply hopeful that we can have a two-state solution where Palestinian families can live in peace and security and self-determination. Hamas is disarmed as a terrorist group, and Israeli families can live in peace and security and self-determination. I'm not giving up on that. We have to stop the violence in the West Bank and the unencroached territorial gains that are happening, because that's not conducive to a two-state peace process. But we also need to stop this warmonger of a president. I mean, he renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War, and he's spending $25 billion of taxpayer money on his war in Iran, where we don't have affordable health care and access to food and education here in our own country. And so that's what I'm going to stand up for when I get to Congress.
Okay. Marnie, you have called climate change an urgent threat, a position that virtually all of the climate scientists support. And yet the Trump administration, among other things, has withdrawn the United States from the Paris Climate Accord and taken all kinds of actions to weaken measures aimed at curbing greenhouse gas emissions while boosting fossil fuel production. And I might add, steps to worsen air pollution in Southern California to take some of California's rights, to have the kind of laws they have away. I will add, I am a person who literally passed out from smog in Los Angeles in the early 80s and had to be revived by paramedics. So I
Oh, I'm
know just
sorry.
how bad it used to be here before those steps that Trump wants to get rid of. So, what actions do you believe are most important to address climate change and reverse the backsliding that we have seen on this very important issue, Marnie?
Yeah, well, Miriam, thank you for sharing your story. My parents spent time in Los Angeles before I was born in the
Mhm.
70s, and they've told me how thick the smog was and
It
how
was
horrible it was for air.
brown and gross. You
Yes.
could smell it, you could taste it. You couldn't
Yes.
see more than a very short distance. It was awful.
Awful. Yep. And so I will be a champion for our environment, champion for climate action in Congress, just as I have been here in San Diego. I helped lead the vote to do a $60 million grant program to install electric vehicle chargers all throughout our public facilities so we can get, zero emissions cars on the road and give people places to charge them. We just invested 125 million in building retrofits to meet our zero emissions building goals by retiring our old diesel generators that we had at our police stations and fire stations. Instead, put solar on the rooftop and battery storage, because solar is free and it doesn't pollute our environment. But what we're seeing is the cost of all of this is going up because Donald Trump has reversed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act funding for climate change programs, and these are good union jobs. IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, is one of my strongest supporters for this campaign. They're the ones who've trained the next generation to do electric vehicle charger installation and solar panel installation.
Yeah.
And so we can create good green jobs. In addition, what Donald Trump is doing is increasing our energy prices and wasting our taxpayer money. You may have seen, Miriam, that he decided to pay $1 billion of federal taxpayer money to the French company that was in the middle of installing wind farm technology
Mhm.
in the East Coast. And instead of allowing them to complete their project, which would have provided clean, sustainable, and lower cost energy to Americans on the East Coast, he paid them $1 billion to stop their project and pay them for the cost they'd incurred.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I want to touch on back on the economy again for a moment. The um, Despite bringing in Elon Musk and Doge to just take an axe basically to many federal agencies and slash many 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 federal jobs, um, claiming to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, and probably a lot more than that. Um, Despite that, though, Trump has spent so much on all of these wars and, loss of military equipment that he's actually run up the biggest deficit and the worst national debt in U.S. history at this point.
Correct.
So it becomes a question of how on earth do we, spend money on things like better jobs and addressing climate change, and at the same time, work to roll back the national debt and the deficit to more manageable levels, so we're not saddling future generations with, an economic uh, disaster.
Yeah, I am deeply terrified by the uncontrolled federal spending that Donald Trump is doing. I mean, and now that Jim Desmond, my Republican opponent, has, said, I warmly accept the endorsement of Donald Trump, and he agrees with him, Jim Desmond will be more of the same rubber stamping of Donald Trump. And that's not what we need in our communities. We need to stop this war in Iran and stop the billions of dollars going abroad to another foreign war in the Middle East that Donald Trump promised the American people he would not get into. We need to undo the permanent tax cuts from 2017 that Donald Trump and Darrell Issa put in to the into national law, because the ultra wealthy in this country should be paying their fair share to make sure that we protect Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and protect our public education system. The ultra wealthy need to pay their fair share in taxes in this country. We also need to work very hard to reduce the national debt. I've worked hard at the city of San Diego, for example, to one, support our local law enforcement and police officers, but also make sure we're systematic about reducing overtime costs
Hmm.
and strategic about how we spend money on overtime, because we don't want to drill a hole in the budget. And I'm watching Donald Trump deploy the National Guard to American cities. Do you know how much money that is costing
A lot.
the federal government? And so I agree with you. We need to invest in Social Security and Medicare and healthcare, and not in Donald Trump's chaos and corruption in DC.
Yeah, we should note that East County is interesting in that it's an area that has actually very, very high rural poverty. We have towns out here where 60% of the people the children are on the school lunch program, maybe more by now. So that's important. East County also has, and San Diego County in general also has a lot of agriculture. Um, we have more family farms in San Diego County than any other county in America. Farms under 10 acres, I should say, which is a fact that often surprises people, as well as a lot of Native American tribes, more than any other.
Hmm.
19 tribes, 18 reservations, more than any other in America. So I wanted to see if this is really two questions, but I wanted to see if you could touch on farm issues for a bit. What would you do to help struggling farmers out there? And also to protect Native American rights, which this president has been, you know, toying with the idea of rolling back some of those rights.
Yeah, no, thank you for the great question. So, in terms of farming, I actually represent farmers in my current San Diego City Council district. In the San Pasqual
Oh,
Valley runs through my district, and I have dairy farmers, avocado farmers, citrus farmers, uh, and
sorry.
they actually do some of the best climate action work of anyone I've ever met. They provide climate sinks or carbon sinks to reabsorb carbon into the environment. Our dairy farmer, Frank Conine, he upcycles, the spent grains from the breweries, for example, because that San Diego County loves their beer breweries.
Mhm.
He then collects the spent grain and feeds it to the cattle as opposed to going to the landfill. It's an incredible community, and I've watched as the chaos in Washington, D.C. has absolutely wreaked havoc on the financial ability for our farmers to exist. The tariffs have been horrible for our farmers.
Yes.
And with the Strait of Hormuz being closed for so long now, fertilizer cannot get out into the world market. And so the price of their fertilizer has gone up, let alone the diesel that they have to put in all their equipment is now over $7 a gallon. So we need to stand up for our farmers and our agricultural communities, and including they also provide food to Americans.
Hmm.
When Donald Trump decided to defund our SNAP benefits, even for seniors aged up to 65, that's also defunding our farmers who actually provide the food and nutritious meals that our seniors need. So we need to undo
Right.
all of this and stand up for them in Congress. And thank you for asking about our fantastic Native American tribes in Congressional District 48. We have so many of them from Sequan to Rincon to Paula, the Kumeyaay Nation. And it's just fantastic to get to work with them. I've worked with them many, many times over my 6 years in city council. And I'd love to be on the Natural Resources Committee when I get to Congress to make sure we do protect our Native American rights here in this country and also celebrate their cultures. It's just they're wonderful, wonderful peoples in our community, and we need to celebrate them and work alongside them.
Very good. Marni, can you tell us some of your major endorsements that you're most proud of, and also where voters can find more information about you and your campaign in the 48th Congressional District?
Yes, so I am most proud that I am, a young woman running for this office and that Emily's List has endorsed me. Emily's List is standing up for women's reproductive rights around this nation. Very honored to earn their endorsement, including the former United States Senator Barbara Boxer has supported me. She retired outside of Palm Springs, so she and I have been on the campaign trail together.
Oh, very good.
Yes, yep. And I'm very proud of my labor endorsements, including the AFL-CIO, the firefighters, local police officers are supporting me, and the gun violence prevention work. Giffords and Brady have both endorsed me for this work, and I'm going to continue that in Congress.
Okay. We are almost out of time today, but I want to give you the last word. Is there anything else that you would like our audience to know that I haven't specifically asked you about?
Yes, so please do check out my website. It is marnivonwilpert.com. And we're leading in the polls and we're leading the fight against Donald Trump. I see firsthand how working families are struggling and Trump is making life worse for everyone in Southern California. And I'm the fighter we need to go fight for us in Congress.
Very good. Uh, Listeners, if you've just tuned in, we have been speaking with Marni Von Wilpert. She is one of the Democrats, one of the leading contenders running in the 48th Congressional District to fill the vacancy left by Darrell Issa. And we will be posting the video and audio and a write-up on this interview on our website. If you tuned in late, you can find that in a couple of days up at eastcountymagazine.org. Marni, thank you so much for joining us here on the East County Magazine radio show on KNSJ 89.1 FM, Descanso.
Thank you for having me.